Who's the rudest celebrity you've met? Story 1. Tommy Lee Jones. I was working as a security guard on the movie shoot for The Hunted. In my second week on the job, I was posted in front of Tommy Lee Jones and Benicio del Toro's trailers on this side street in a residential area. Basically, just stand there all day and make sure nobody messes with anything. Day 1 was fine. I was there all day and never saw Tommy Lee Jones. Benicio came out and went throughout the day and was super nice. He even came out and had a chat once. It was a trip because I had just seen him on TV the prior week accepting an Oscar. I congratulated him on that and he was thankful. Just seemed like an alright dude that wasn't all up his own ass. Day 2 was a different story. I come in at 10 a.m. and relieve the overnight person. I'm standing there and this dog comes trotting up to me, super friendly. I assumed it was a neighborhood dog that got out. It just kinda hung out with me for about 20 minutes until an SUV came flying down the street and stopped right before the barricade. I see an old man hop out the back. He points and yells, "Hey!" and is walking toward me with a purpose. "Get the hell away from my dog!" It's at this point that I realize it's Tommy Lee Jones. I put my hands up and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't know it was your dog." I don't know if he heard me, but he walked right up to me and his driver right behind him ready to pull him back if he had to. He put his finger in my chest and says, "Why is she out? Who let my dog out?" I tried to tell him that she was out when I got there, and I had no idea it was even his dog, but I was only 20 and just completely scared out of my mind, so I was stuttering and stammering, and he kept interrupting me demanding answers. By then, a few more of his people had gathered around and someone got a hold of my boss. Then, my phone rang, and it was my boss telling me to just go home for the day and it would get handled. I went home and called him later asking if I should still come in tomorrow. He said, "Nope, you don't work here anymore." I tried explaining everything, but there was no getting through. So Tommy Lee Jones got me fired from a job for something I was not responsible for. Tommy Lee Jones was my regular 4 years ago when I worked at a hotel bar in San Antonio. He's really rude, but also, not all there. He was certainly strange. We had someone drop off an appetizer and say, "Here you go, friend," and he's like, "I'm not your friend." LMAO. He would write random things on his receipts. I would joke that if I saved all the receipts, I could have maybe cracked some code. He once complained that there was too much grenadine in his margarita, but there was no grenadine in the recipe. So we just gave him less orange liqueur and it satisfied him. But yes, he was just verbally unpleasant and did not want to be spoken to. I've put it in another comment, but I served Tommy way earlier. A separate time when I was younger at an Italian restaurant, and he wrote down his whole order and what time he wanted everything and just shoved it into my hands when I tried to greet him. LOL. Some of the times were weird, increments that didn't end in a 0 or 5. Some other celebs, Ariana Grande was sweet, and we had to protect her and her dancers from her fans, like the dancers were well known enough to be bothered too. I see other entries where she's a witch, but that was not my experience. Dave Chappelle is super down to earth and loves tequila. He's also hilarious in person, even though I hate his recent stand-ups. Cher was very strange but nice and posted on Twitter that we were at one of the best hotels she stayed at, which I thought was ridiculous, but it got us a lot of business. Celine Dion is a stupid idiot. Edit, taking the statement back. We had to close the bar early because when she entered, she didn't want regular people anywhere, so I made less money. We also had to turn off all of our fireplaces in winter because she said smoke messed with her singing voice, but they were gas fireplaces. Since I'm receiving a ton of comments about people having sweet experiences with her, I may be wrong, and it may have been her team. I did not speak to her. She mostly stayed in her room and didn't roam around at all. I asked Michael Keaton if there was ever going to be a sequel to Beetlejuice, and he just rolled his eyes and got on the elevator, LMAO. Wee Man is such a freaking nice guy, and he's really fun to talk to. J-Lo is a witch, and she's also really short, LOL. I had no idea, but she smells amazing, and the smell lingered wherever she went. Also, not a sports fan, and I don't know which one it is, but there was one guy on the Spurs that ordered well-done steak and had ketchup on top, and I wanted to vomit everywhere. I'm technically breaking my NDA. I met Tommy Lee Jones when I was in a theater program at a private Catholic university in Texas in 1993. He was close friends with my theater professor. He came to several of our shows and would hang out in our green room. I was in the middle of a quick change. I worked in the costume shop off to the side of the stage. It was one of the roughest quick changes I ever completed. I had 75 seconds to get a very large, very sweaty and smelly actor into a new doublet and tights. Mr. Jones had watched me complete the change and complimented me once my actor was back on stage. I wonder if he was terrible to you because he was talented as opposed to an onlooker. During that same shoot, my friend was an extra. He saw Tommy crossing the street and wanted to say something, so he asked him for a smoke. Tommy said, "Sure," then lit it up and put it in his own mouth, drew from it, then casually dropped it on the street, snuffed it out with his foot, and kept walking without saying another word. I found it amusing at the time, but after reading this, I might have to change my mind. What an a-hole. My brother had a friend who was a local police officer who was a guard for celebrities who came into town for filming. The movie Elizabethtown was filming, and Kirsten Dunst and Orlando Bloom were filming a scene. My brother and I got to be on set and watch them film. They yelled cut, and Orlando Bloom was walking past my brother and me while a PA handed Orlando his dog. So he's walking by us while holding his dog, and we had asked for a picture, and he said, "Ugh, no." Didn't even bother looking at us. Then two youngish ladies walked up to him and asked for a picture, and his PA said no, but Orlando interrupted and said, "Sure, anything for my fans, I love my fans," and gave me and my brother a quick look that felt like "except for you two." Then he walked away. Another day, while they were still filming the movie, my brother and I got to meet Kirsten Dunst as she was walking by, and he asked, "Excuse me, would it be alright if we got a picture with you?" And she said, "I guess." Then my brother handed me the camera and I took the pic for him, but then he couldn't take the pic for me because she had to leave. Another time, we got to meet Anna Nicole Smith while she arrived at the airport. She was so happy and sweet. Story 2. This happened in the early 1990s. I handled security at a large corporate hotel in a Canadian city. Any big-name group that performed in our city stayed at our hotel. I was escorting Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers from their guest floor to the lobby for their limo one morning at 4:30 a.m. I am 6'5", and when Miss Parton approached me, as I stood outside of the elevator, she said, in her sweet Southern Belle voice, "Y'all sure grow 'em big up here in Canada." She touched my arm in a friendly manner. She was just as sweet as pie. I blushed and instantly forgot everything about my job. Kenny did not even look at me as he boarded the elevator. I had put the elevator into individual use, so it would stay on the floor with the doors open, but took the keys with me. When it was time to descend to the lobby, in my flustered state, I had forgotten which of the roughly 30 keys on the ring controlled the elevator. Despite having worked there for several years, there was a long pause while I searched for the key ring, key by key, 2 or 3 times. Kenny was glaring at me the whole time, barely concealed rage bubbling just under the surface. I finally found the right key, but when I went to put the elevator back into group service, in my haste I fumbled and dropped the keys. Kenny made a louder, exasperated sound, but Dolly came to my defense, touching my arm again and saying, "Sugar, you just take your time. We're in no hurry." Kenny made another noise, but Dolly shushed him. We eventually made it to the lobby, and I escorted them to the carport in their waiting limo. Kenny never even looked at me as he walked out the door and got into the car. Dolly, however, stopped to chat with me for a bit, thanking me and then tipping me a $100 US bill. That was more than I made in a day back then. She did the same for the bellman who had brought their luggage down. Total class act. That was my favorite and least favorite celebrity at the same time. A different perspective. When I was about 7, I saw Kenny Rogers with his rock band, The First Edition. I think that's the name, at an amusement park in California. My friend, around the same age, and I were running around being kids as the place was practically empty. There couldn't have been more than 20 people in the theater. My friend and I ran up to the stage, and Kenny Rogers said, "Cute kid," and tried to pick me up. I screamed bloody murder and ran to my mommy like the scared little girl I was. Of note, he was very thin and had long, stringy hair at the time. He didn't look like the Kenny Rogers in later years. In the late 80s, he came to my town, not in California, for an event, and stopped at the grocery store that I was working at for chewing gum, Wrigley's Double Mint, if you must know. He came to my register and I told him about the prior instance that we met. He remembered me and teased me. He then invited me to the event that he was attending. As a 16-year-old idiot, I said I couldn't go because my shift wasn't over and I couldn't just leave. With that, I remember him fondly. I don't doubt he was a jerk to many different times in his life. Fame can have that effect on people. This reminds me of when I worked at a luxury hotel in Nashville. Joel Osteen stayed one night. Always had his bodyguard with him, only used the private employee entrance, and we were not allowed to even look at him, let alone talk to him. Those were the instructions before he came. Lady Gaga stayed there as well when she did her dive bar tour. When she checked out, management let us know that she would be leaving by the private entrance, and if we wanted to come down and say hi, we were more than welcome. She took some photos with employees, typically a fireable offense, but exceptions were made, talked a few minutes, and then posted a glowing review on her Instagram about the hotel. Super lovely person. Story 3. The rudest celebrity I've ever met was Jack Nicholson. I asked him for an autograph and he growled at me that he only signs autographs for chicks with huge breasts. The nicest celebrity I ever met was Lemmy Kilmister from Motorhead. I was at a bar and he sat down beside me. I was in awe and stammered out, "Let me buy you a drink." He said, "Nah, you can't do that." I was a little dejected and hung my head. He immediately burst out in laughter and said, "Kid, I'm a goddamn rock star. Let me buy you a drink." I then spent the night with Lemmy buying me Long Island iced tea while we talked about 60s British science fiction. Lemmy saw my dad struggling, my dad is disabled, and got his guard to help my dad and personally grabbed my dad's other arm. The three of us walked to our car and Lemmy gave us his contact info and $100 to make sure I could get him to urgent care, and he wanted an update ASAP. I met Lemmy too. I had just gotten off of work from the restaurant attached to the hotel where rock stars of his caliber stay. As soon as I turned the corner, I saw him, just sitting quietly by himself in the middle of the afternoon. I sat down next to him and we just chatted casually for a while. He was playing a show with his other band, and when it was time to leave, I walked him to his bus stop and shook his hand, and said it was very nice to meet you, and he replied the same. He was just so sweet. His hands were very shaky, I remember. This was really close to when he passed away. I had a buddy who used to be in the Colorado State Patrol outside of the Aspen/Glenwood Springs area. He pulled over Jack Nicholson in the mid-2000s for speeding. Jack pulled the "Do you know who I am?" card. According to my buddy, he responded, "Yeah, I do. I loved you in Batman. Please sign here." My buddy said he was a straight-up dick and totally talked himself into a ticket. I absolutely second that Lemmy was the nicest freaking human. When I was in my early 20s, I was living in Palm Springs and would go to LA for the weekend. I always wanted to stay at the Riot Hyatt, so I booked the best room I could afford and headed out. Once I got there, I couldn't get into the bar downstairs, so I went across the street and bought a handle of Jack D and went back to my room. I sat on the balcony and was smoking my cigs and having a drinky drink, watching the people on the street. This was before they put up the safety glass. An older gentleman stepped out and bummed a smoke. He noticed my JD and I handed him the bottle. We sat there and drank and smoked for almost 2 hours. I was trashed. At one point I jokingly told him for $5 I would find him a rat to chew those moles off his face. He probably laughed for 2 minutes solid. He told me he loved my accent and I told him I loved him. He met my mom, who came with me, and she apologized to him for me being so loud. He thought I was on a trip. We had a blast until he said he had to leave. The next week, my mom called and told me that man from the hotel is on MTV. I had spent 2 hours getting Jack Daniels drunk with Lemmy and did not have a clue. He was very nice and just a genuinely decent human. Rest in peace, Lemmy. I know who you are now, man. Story 4. William Shatner said he would give me an autograph in Hawaii when I was about 10. He said, "Let me get a pen," got in his limo and drove off. He's such a prick. He looked at my service dog, sneered at me, and said, "What's wrong with you?" My response was, "I'm a disabled veteran with PTSD. What's wrong with you?" I wasn't even in line for him. I was talking to Marina Sirtis at the table next over. My parents owned a furniture store that was located next to the hotel he stayed at when he was in town. He was here for something horse show related. Anyway, he ended up buying a bunch of furniture from my parents' store, and when they were discussing the logistics of shipping the items to him, my dad said, "Maybe we could beam them up to you." Shatner was not happy. He didn't cancel his order, but my dad said he really screwed that up. As a kid, I went to a Cincinnati Reds game in the late 80s with my dad and brother. Afterward, we went to the hotel where the visiting team was staying to try to get autographs from Expos players as they arrived. Everyone was super cool and signed for me except for Tim "Rock" Raines. I politely asked for his autograph and he took my ball, put the marker to it like he was about to sign, and then said, "Nah," and handed it back. Screw that guy. I didn't care for them as a band, but Steely Dan was playing in an outdoor amphitheater. I was biking past the tour bus at the end of the show and started talking to a bunch of guys hanging out with albums. They said that they had been there since the band came out of their bus. The band told them to wait until after the show and they'd sign then. So they waited and waited. The band finally came out. Security pushed the waiting fans away and the band got on the bus, leaving everyone standing in diesel fumes. A friend of mine was his handler at one of our comic book conventions. He was basically his personal servant and chauffeur for that time that he was down. They actually got to be good friends. He said that everywhere they went, Shatner automatically assumed that anyone within 10 feet knew who he was and wanted his autograph. He said it kind of got ridiculous. At one point, their waiter came up to them, and before he could say anything, Shatner was telling him that he didn't give autographs. The waiter responded with, "Okay, would you like to order some food?" Although they got along well, he did say that Shatner was very rude to people, often assuming that before they could even approach him, they were going to approach him and ask for an autograph. In fact, very few people actually recognized him. Story 5. I used to live in the same city as Tommy Lee Jones, and there was a point in time where if you worked in the service industry, you either had your own story about him or knew someone who did. I have a few of my own. Celebrity or not, he is hands down one of the rudest people I've ever come across. Very demanding and hateful. He looks down on service workers and treats them like crap, but at the same time expects them to simultaneously 1. Know who he is. 2. Not acknowledge who he is, but 3. Give him special treatment because of who he is. I remember Jim Carrey talking about how much TLJ seriously hated him when they worked on Batman Forever. Jim Carrey said hello to him during the set, and Tommy Lee's response was, "I hate you. I really don't like you. I cannot sanction your buffoonery." Also, I just read a story from someone who worked on the first Men in Black movie talking about Will Smith, who is known for his terrible farts, and basically hotboxed TLJ in the fancy supercar with his farts while it was hermetically sealed. So if he is that much of an a-hole, I'm glad that happened to him. So glad to see him at the top of the replies here. Back in 2001, I was working at Regal Cinemas in Royal Palm Beach, Florida, and Tommy Lee Jones came in on a random weekday to watch a movie. It was super slow at the time. He and the lady he was with were extraordinarily rude to everyone who worked at the theater. Word spread quickly, and the other ushers picked up the giant Men in Black 2 standee right to the door of the auditorium, so that the first thing Jones saw as he exited the theater was all the graffiti we drew all over his face. Worst of all, he came back to our theater a year later to shoot a commercial, which aired for years before every movie. I worked at the small grocery store that he would frequent. I remembered him standing in line, saying nothing, and then when I had his groceries, he popped the trunk of his black Cadillac. He didn't look at me or talk. Not horrible at all, but was very quiet. My favorite was Gary Shandling, and my least favorite was John Cleese, because he banged on the door after we were closed and had us open up for his wine and cheese. Carol Burnett was pretty awesome. She talked to me about the weather and her green VW Bug. I remember going to a talk/presentation from a big celebrity portrait photographer, and when he showed a pic of Tommy Lee Jones, he paused and was like, "This is the rudest piece of shit human being I've ever photographed. He's an a-hole, just a complete a-hole." Dude was still in the business of photographing celebs, and he said it to a packed audience. He was diplomatic with any other person, agent, or editor when speaking about difficulties, but with Tommy Lee Jones, he absolutely didn't hold back. Story 6. I hung out with Charles Barkley once in Philly, and for some reason he took a liking to me, and was very candid and open. He told me you have to be nice to every single person you meet, and it can be exhausting. But if you meet 100 people and are nice to 99 but not to one, then that one will bash you and tell everyone what a terrible person you are, and people will believe them. Awesome guy. Was walking to the restroom while at a work dinner, and walked past his table. He saw me do a double take, got up from his table, walked up to me and said, "Yeah, it's me. What's up?" and offered me a handshake. We talked for a few minutes and he asked what we had going on in the meeting room at the restaurant. I told him what I did for work and that it was great to meet him, but that I appreciated his time and didn't want to keep him from his group. Went to the restroom and made my way back to the meeting room. A few minutes later, he just walked into the meeting room and hung out with everyone for a while. Let everyone take pics and go on his way. Super nice fella. He went to a high school near ours when we were kids. Our teams played each other, and I saw him play many times. It was like seeing a rocket lift off. We all knew he had talent. I walked over and congratulated him after stomping our team's asses. He was funny, friendly, and had no attitude about his future. Very down to earth. He came and found me after our next game. Years later, I was in a club downtown and I turned around into him. He said, "I remember your ass," and gave me a hug. He told me to stick around because a friend was coming by. That's the night I shook Michael Jordan's hand. This was when Michael was playing baseball in Birmingham. Charles is from a small town called Leeds outside of town. Wonderful coincidence and a great night. Thanks, Sir Charles. You were always a nice guy to me. I agree. I met Charles Barkley in New Orleans in 2017, and I asked him to take a picture with me and my friends, who did not know anything about the NBA. One of my friends thought he was just taking a picture of us and was super confused by why he got in the photo. When I told her that he was Charles Barkley, she told him how much she loved his music. He just laughed and said thank you. I told him, we met once before at a casino in the Bahamas, and he said, "Oh, I never go to casinos," and just winked and laughed. Charles invited us to come and go over to the next bar with him and all his friends, but we declined because we were having a low-key night. What a nice guy. During the SLC NBA All-Star game back in '93, my little sister with a few of her cheerleader friends, very cute girls, went downtown to try and spot some basketball superstars. Well, my sister and one of her friends found Barkley in a line at a fast food place in a mall and politely tapped on his arm for an autograph. My sister said he sort of turned around and then looked down at them and said, "Well, hello, little people." They all laughed, and my sister got an autograph, and she and her friend went merrily on their way. Totally kind and totally polite. Yeah, I met a guitarist named Jake from Umphreys McGee one night about 20 years ago, and he came off like he was the best thing since Hendrix. He made a little crack about Trey from Phish, who had just announced the "We're Done" breakup about a month or so earlier. 6 months ago, I saw UM at the Windjammer in Charleston amongst a sparse-ish crowd. Meanwhile, Phish was dominating the Sphere in Vegas. I thought about hanging around long enough after the show to see if I could get in a handshake, but then it occurred to me that he knew exactly who was playing the Sphere that night. Buddies of mine in that scene swear Jake's a nice enough guy and that he's a fun hang. Made me wonder if I just crossed paths with him at the wrong place and time. Story 7. Got a call to David Spade's room at like 2 a.m. because he had issues with his Wi-Fi. When I told him I couldn't fix it and he had to wait for IT, in the morning he said, in the most deadpan David Spade way, "I figured you wouldn't be able to fix it. I didn't figure they put their best and brightest on the graveyard shift." When I was 20, I worked in a pizza shop in Boston and he came in. It was very low-key during the day, even though it was one of the most hyped-up slice spots downtown. He came in early on a weekday, when it was pretty slow, and was wearing an enormous fedora-type hat that was pulled down over his face as much as possible. And he had some blonde, at least 20 years younger than him, on his arm. They got buffalo chicken slices, and he sat in one of the booths with both of his feet on the bench, with his knees up by his chin, sort of like a toddler would. He seemed to revel in being eccentric, like he was going for this sort of Bob Dylan thing, and he and the girl were sort of cuddling in the booth too. After a little bit, it was just us three in there, and it got sort of quiet and awkward. As it was a tiny place, so he orders another slice, and when I bring it over to him, I just quietly say to him, "Hey, I was wondering, who's your favorite rascal?" And then I just walked away before he could answer, and I actually heard him snicker as I was on my way back to the kitchen. He definitely seemed like he could have been a major tool, but he was also sorta cool. Story 8. I met Jared Leto in Nashville in the early 2000s with my female friend who was very attractive and also 16. Didn't stop J-Dog from asking her if she wants to go screw in the first few minutes of the meeting. She declined and was very grossed out by it, so we left. True story. We seem to be in the midst of an era of every celebrity who had salacious rumors circulating about them 15 to 20 years ago that people have forgotten about being busted for running sex cults. Meanwhile, Jared Leto is a massive sex pest, is a pedophile / runs a sex cult, has been an open secret for decades or more, and yet this dude is still getting insanely high-profile roles and it never seems to come up. How the hell has this dude avoided an actual investigation? Pretty much every single story I hear about the guy interacting with fans is, "Oh yeah, he tried to hook up with me or my friend when we were like 15. But there's been zero official press about it. The dude must have dirt on everyone in Hollywood. Facts. A friend got us meet and greet tickets for a show many years ago, before it came out that he was creepy as he is. He was staring me down the whole time and flirting and made a similar offer. When I noted I was 17, he laughed and carried on like he hadn't heard me. Even if he hadn't. I've always looked very young for my age, so at the time I probably looked like 14 or 15 and he kept at it. I was disappointed because I was really there to meet Shannon, but Shannon just looked pissed off at everyone and Jared wouldn't stop. We wound up leaving shortly after, and that man stared at me the whole way out the door. Story 9. I have some clients who interact with celebs and I get fun stories. One client is a private pilot. He said the loveliest he's flown is Green Day. Like, he just went on and on about how sweet and genuine and thankful they are. He said Mike Pence was extremely polite, a true gentleman even though he can't stand his politics. He said Ariana Grande was a raging cunt and literally one of the worst people he's ever met. Trashed his plane, insanely rude and demanding, he refuses to fly for her anymore. I have a few clients that work in film. My god, do they love working with Nicolas Cage. Very professional and extremely personal, likes to have deep conversations and connect with everyone on set, and remembers everyone's names. I love hearing Nick Cage stories. This is so random, but when I was like 7, I went to Michigan with my mom and aunts for my great-grandmother's funeral. And all I remember from this was there was a limo that took us to the funeral and the driver said, "You know, I just had Green Day in here the other day. They were the nicest guys." In retrospect, it was probably inappropriate that he said that on the way to the funeral. But all my mom and aunts have said, my great-grandma was incredibly mean, so. Story 10. Haven't met too many celebs, but I gotta say that Bill Nye the Science Guy was the rudest. I grew up in Seattle and I ran into him with my dad when I was really young and he was setting up for a shoot for that show down on LAKEY Beach. I was a huge nerd and he was one of my heroes because of that show. My pops told me to go say hello, so I did, and Bill responded something along the lines of, "Get out of here, kid, we're busy. Where are your parents at?" And I pointed at my pa across the beach and was like, "Right over there." Bill told me to leave him alone. I was devastated. Mind you, I was like 6 or 7. On the other hand, I met Woody Harrelson and Willie Nelson on separate occasions when I was a bit older, 22 or 23, and living on my own in Maui. They were both super nice. They were both stoned, as I was when I met them. When I met Woody, I was working at Manna Foods stocking shelves, and Woody walked down the aisle I was stocking. His eyes were squints that were red as hell, and when I saw him coming, I just said, "Hey Woody, how's it going?" And he responded, "Hey, what's up, man? It's good, how are you?" We had a little conversation before he got back to what he was doing and I got back to work. It felt like a genuine chill meeting with someone I respect. Can confirm that Woody Harrelson is a good dude. I was an extra during the shoot of Now You See Me, and it was in the theater that was dilapidated and falling apart after being reopened for shooting after being closed since Katrina. It was hot and stuffy from the summer heat. It reeked of mold and mildew, and at one point a rat that had dropped from the upper levels nearly caused a stampede among the extras. In between takes, he would stand on stage and chat with the audience, tell amusing anecdotes and lead with sports chants. Went a long way towards keeping up the morale of what ended up being an arduous week and a half. A couple of other gems during that shoot were Morgan Freeman, Mark Ruffalo, and Dave Franco. Funny story, I lived in Brentwood for a long time and the independent pharmacy we went to and a lot of celebs and entertainment execs also went. My father-in-law is a doctor and happens to be born in Midland, Texas, where Woody Harrelson grew up. Without fail, every time he called in a prescription for us, the clerk would say, "Hi Woody," or "Is this Woody?" I guess a Midland, Texas accent is really recognizable. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you would like to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.